You want me to go live or you?
Yeah, we're good. We're good. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another exciting installment of HAPI Talks. Tonight we have with us two legendary men, esteemed colleagues, New York State Senator James Sanders Jr. and first Independence Bank CEO and President Kenneth Kelly. I'd like you to welcome these two gentlemen to the platform. It's very important that we have them here discussing this most important topic today, the importance of keeping the Black dollars in the Black community. And who would we have better than if someone representing the economic side and someone representing the political side? And the film HAPI, we talk so much about the underscore of how important economics and politics is to government and how important it is to the Black community. And making the film, I come to find out that most of us don't really understand how the two of them work together. Because I know I surely didn't until we started getting into production, and I realized just how important economics and politics is, and just how much of us are in our community ignorant to the fact. So with that, without any further ado, I'm gonna introduce first Independent CEO and President, Mr. Kenneth Kelly, and New York State Senator James Sanders Jr. Please welcome them. Gentlemen, I'm gonna start off asking you guys some basic questions about, how you got into, about your life and how you got into your various fields. We start off with you, Senator.
Well, a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to be with your audience. I am very honored to be in your presence, and especially in the presence of Mr. Kelly. We were talking about of our background, and it turns out that we share similarities. And I guess it's that old country stuff that just keeps us going and brings us to the same point that if you don't have dollars, then it doesn't make sense. And I'm dragged into it because I was listening to the OJs the other day, and they were saying that money is the root of all evil. That's not what the Bible says. It said the love of money. And who was that? Reverend Al, who was talking about the lack of money is the root of all evil. Well, whatever the saying is, my friends, we are here because we need to take care of things in a capitalist society. And that means that if you don't have capital, you really don't count. And that's what took me here. And I'm glad to be here. And I'm really looking forward to learning a lot more from Mr. Kelly. I think he's the one who can teach both of us.
Yeah, Mr. Kelly, he's definitely something. So, Senator Sanders, how did you get involved in politics and why?
Well, I was drafted, sir. I never wanted to be a politician. I wanted to. At first, I was going to be a preacher, of course. Then I was going to be a lawyer, of course. Then I decided to do something, sensible and become a historian because you can make a lot of money in history. And if you believe that one, I'll tell you another one. So as a student activist, I kept doing things and people kept saying to me, well, you're doing so great on college, but how about your own community? And I started doing in the community, and people kept drafting me and telling me to run for this, run for the school board, run for the council, run. Now I'm a state senator, and they keep telling me things even now. So I never planned to be an elected, uh, but it's a good thing. And the good Lord has me here at a time when we need fighters, and I'm here to fight.
They're here to fight. Can you tell us a little bit about your political evolution?
Sure. Let's see. I have done a bunch of stuff. I am a Marine. I did Marine Corps, and I'm a Marine Corps grunt, which means a real Marine. Well, I'll be kind. We didn't deal with pencils and papers. We we used a different method to figure things out. The business end, if you wish. I did Marine Corps, but I also worked for Congressman Flake when he was a congressman. So I've done a bunch of things. I've created youth programs. I have done many different things, and I've been drawn into economic development. And when I was in the city council, I became the first African or African American, I use the word interchangeably, the first African to chair economic development in New York City in 350 years. This city, this city's all about money, and they let you do a lot of things, but they do not let you play with their money. What they believe is what they call their money, which is really your money, because the rich don't use their money; they'd rather use yours. So
Right.
I've done that. I worked under Bloomberg, as a matter of fact. He was a mayor and I was chair of economic development. So I had a great teacher if you wanted to learn economic development. And I ultimately ran for the state senate against an incumbent, which is impossible to win. You can't win against an incumbent. And well, but the people had a different way of looking at it, and they decided that they would send me. Along the way, I was an Obama delegate before anybody knew how to say his name. Before Iowa, I was with Obama. I was one of the few people in New York City to back Obama when he ran. In Queens, there are around 30 different elected officials. I was the only one, black or white, to back him when he ran. And of course, I had to back Bernie after that. Oh, it's a Sanders thing. Well, how could I not back fellow Sanders? And what would I do at the family reunion? So I backed Bernie. In fact, I'm a Bernie delegate again. Uh, although I think they call it a Bernie Biden delegate, or is that a Biden Bernie, or who knows? I'll know in a few days. So um, I I've been doing a lot. I am the father of MWBE, Minority and Women Business Owned Enterprises in New York
Mhm.
State and New York City. I wrote the laws in New York City. I wrote the law now, just finished it in New York State. And I'm currently the chair of banking for New York State. And in it, they are going to rue the day that they put me there. But until then, we're going to have some fun.
Okay, copy that. Mr. Kenneth Kelly, sir, how about yourself? Can you tell us
Oh, great.
tell the audience a little bit about you?
Certainly. Thanks, Taki, and thanks for having me. And again, it's my pleasure here to be with the senator also. And it's obvious to me that he's a servant leader. He said he gets drafted, but that just tells me he demonstrates how to serve, and people see servant leadership and they just draft you, Senator. So it is a pleasure to be here with you. My background's a little bit varied. I will tell you, I grew up pretty decent in math and science and ended up moving into engineering, got my bachelor's in engineering, and worked in the field utility space for many years. Had the fortune of working in marketing and corporate finance and human resources and supply chain and marketing leadership, sales leadership, and business development, and then ended my career in mergers and acquisitions. And so I moved from that role when retiring from the utility to become chairman and CEO of a First Independence Bank based in Detroit, which is right now the 8th largest commercially African-American owned and controlled bank in the country. And so as you talk about economics, I would say to the listening audience, we all participate in economics on a daily basis. And the key to what we've got to do is really the essence of the title of your movie, which is understanding that economics, politics, and culture all run together. And so when we look at the culture we have today, it has been because of the economics of this country. It has been because of the politics and policies that are set forth. So as we talk about this and have more of a dialogue today, the point I would like to stress to all of this listening audience is that if you have an interest in being the best you can be in your community, to be in a capitalistic society, you have to understand the interrelated relationship between economics and politics.
So you know what's so funny? You actually just took the first question. The first question is actually for you. How are they connected, economics and politics? And what is the interrelationship between the two?
Well, go ahead, Senator. I'll let you go now.
No. I just want to amen when you finish. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, certainly. So, I mean, it's interrelating. You think about, we've created the world's largest economy, right? Right here in America, inside of the 50 states, or really contiguous 48 states. And that's out of 300 million people now, out of over 6 billion people in the world. So how do you do that? You do that by ensuring that your policies and your money and your capital can consolidate. And when that money and capital consolidates, it has the ability, almost like an exponential function, not to just grow this way, but to grow that way and move very fast. So when you look at this country and you look at what happened through slavery and the cotton gin, we were selling a cotton from this country across the world off of the backs of individuals who look like us. And that there was no tax for it. The labor was low cost. And what you know in economics is the correlation between capital and technology or tools is interrelated. So there's a direct relationship where if I can get low labor, I can basically optimize the capital for my society. And so what we see today is even a spreading and a widening of the wealth gap because of the consolidation of wealth, even within our own country. So not only is it making us wealthy as a country, but it's creating the dichotomy between the haves and the have-nots. And so if you don't understand that, then it's hard for you to figure out how to contribute in a way to hopefully create more economics across your community. What does that mean, Kenneth? When you look at the direct relationship between education and the school systems and the taxes that are being paid, it is separate and unequal, period. It is based on the value of the homes that surround that school system, so that if I live in a poor neighborhood, I naturally will have less resources to go into teaching and training my kids. If I live in the wealthiest neighborhood, because of the tax base, I have the advantage of having more computers, more teachers who have specialties to train my kids, such that when I get to the 12th grade and we're comparing ACT scores, there's going to be separation. And so if you don't understand those things at a very basic level, then it's very hard to get and gather resources and pull them into the communities that you care about, which is the work I know the senator probably does on a daily basis, which is to create more equality for us in our own tax system. And so those are the challenges you have in understanding that. But the reality is that happens because of policy. Some of it's set at the local level, some set at the state level, and most importantly, that which is set at the federal level.
If I may just join in here, Brother Kelly has said it so well. I'll just put one or two small amens in there. I would encourage everybody, when they think about politics and when they think about economics, it's like looking at your hand. One side may be a little darker and the other side lighter, but it's still your hand. It goes hand in hand. And there is no real separation. In America, we believe in the golden rule. And no, not the one you learned in church, the one that says he who has the goal rules. So, and they rule in a political fashion, but it's based on they have enough money that they can, they can buy a whole bunch of politicians in politics. And you can look at it by looking at where are negative things placed. If you're going to put an incinerator in a community, if you're going to put any of these negative things in a community, you usually are going to put it in a community that doesn't have the strength to protect itself, that doesn't have the strength to say no, that doesn't have and that strength is political, my friends. But notice, it's because of an economic thing that somebody wants to make money from an incinerator, but they know that if they ever considered going to the richest part of town to put that incinerator in, bad things would happen to them. So they will go to the poorest part of town. And that's a clear correlation between your politics and your economics. Everything we do is political. The air you breathe is political. How much pollutants are in your air? How many waste plants and chemical plants you have in your neighborhood? Those are political decisions that affect your health, that affect your politics, that are created because there's enough money where people are saying, hey, I want this. It has some bad side effects. So we're going to put it into the area where people can't stop us. So the way to stop that, of course, is to organize ourselves and to use your politics to ensure that your economics follow suit. And that we are in such a bad position is because we have not used politics to create economic opportunities. Some people like Mr. Kelly and Mr. Grant are able to elbow their way into a system. But imagine if there was a system that was out there designed to help them move forward instead of hindering their forward motion. Imagine where we would be. And then don't imagine it anymore. Organize and do it.
On that note, you open the door for the next one, Senator Sanders. Um, as we look at how to help underserved communities, we'd like to know, like, how can legislation bring economic opportunities and resources to people, just say in the Black community?
Well, let's take something concrete that everybody is going through. There's talk all over the country of legalizing marijuana. All right, regardless of how you feel for it or against it, I must admit I'm kind of against it. But regardless of how you feel about it, if they were to legalize it, the Black community right now is not prepared to take advantage of it. Why? Because it costs so much money to get into the field. It costs in up in Boston where they have it legalized. It costs you more than $1 million to open up your shop with all of the costs, and that's before you stock your shop.
Mm-hmm.
And that's before you hire your workers. $1 million in fees and things of that nature. And even to transport the marijuana or the money from the marijuana, the prices start at $500,000. This takes most of the Black community out. And there's a clear correlation between our politics and our economics. Now, what politics is supposed to do is insist that it doesn't cost the oppressed communities $1 million. That we find ways of making the super rich who want in on this badly, let them subsidize it. Let them pay the lion's share of the cost so that we can allow these communities to catch up. That's what you could do with a proper use of politics, just to use that as a concrete example.
Thank you for that, Mr. Kelly. In your opinion, what is one of the biggest obstacles facing the urban communities, financial, that is?
I would tell you it is very fundamentally, I would say, education. And when you think about that, you have to think in terms of, not how do I use my hands, but how do I use my head? And when I say that, and I don't mean to be disparaging, because there's always a need for lay people laying bricks and doing plumbing work and doing automation work, etc. But what I'm suggesting is when you think about the ability to intersect the economics and politics, a lot of times that's about this, because you're now figuring out how do I create policies to do what the senator just said. We know there's a problem. We can't have marijuana in Black communities. That's a problem because the policies are set in a way that creates an immediate barrier so people can't get there. So now we got to use this and think about how do we do it synthetically, knowing we don't have the money. That might mean you have to go create some partnerships. It might mean you have to create some joint ventures to say, you're not coming in this neighborhood unless somebody from this neighborhood is a part of it. And so that is a part I think we got to think about in that spirit, to be sure we are included. But that doesn't happen from the brunt of our backs. It's got to happen from the way we think about things and how do we see past some of these synthetic barriers that are put up in front of us.
Senator Sanders, you'd like to weigh in on that question? One of the biggest obstacles?
Sure.
Okay.
Now, I love education, and I started out at Winston-Salem State University. I had to put that plug in and graduated Brooklyn College. So I'm a firm believer in education, but I would also like to say that access to capital is one of the main detriments that we're having, that the majority banks are not lending. Every study is basically showing that regardless of your economic level, they're not lending money. So access to capital and relationship, where if you don't know who your politicals are, you are flying blind. Sooner or later, you're going to come and see me. Now, I'd rather you come and you can see me now or you can see me later, my friends. It would be better that you, just like Lynette Cook is trying to get in touch with me today, uh, it would be better that you come and see me in advance than come after the fact talking about the contract that you lost or the opportunity that's gone and Sanders, you need to do something about it. And I'm going to tell you that, my friend, the country part of me is going to tell you, you closing the barn door after the horse is gone. It would be better for you to see me before that the contract is gone, so that we can make sure that you are well prepared, and we can make sure that the other side knows that you're not walking in there by yourself.
Right, right. Well stated. And just to be clear, when I said education, I meant really also experience. So that doesn't mean you have to go get a 4-year degree. It just means you've got to have that experience. And to the senator's point, relationship capital matters. And so that may mean sometimes behaving outside of our comfort zone. And I tell people money is a lot like oxygen. You can see where it is. You just ride through a neighborhood and you can tell by the greenness of the grass, the color of the flowers, if there's money there. Or you can tell if it's not there when you see places boarded up and glass is broken and knocked out and the grass is not kept. And the point I'm trying to make is if you're in a neighborhood where you don't see a lot of oxygen, make the effort to get to find and know people. Like the senator said, you're going to come see me, go see him. And also when you see people who have, nicely landscaped lawns, get to know them also, because that may be the relationship that could change your life.
Relationships is such a key piece, and producing the film that we just finished working on, I realized just how important relationship capital is. Everything we did in the film was based on a relationship. Even this interview here is based on relationships. The relationship I had with Marvin Holland introduced me to Senator Sanders, and relationships we've had with others introduced me to Kenneth Kelly. So it's really so important to understand relationships and how they work together and how valuable they are, particularly in our community. I think these two gentlemen hit on something really important. I think we all need to pay attention to that and understand that even in an economic sense, relationships work in the same way as other economics do. So this one is for both. With Black people having approximately 2% of the overall wealth in this country, how can politics address the issue of disparity of wealth?
With your permission, Brother Kelly.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you. The budget of New York State is $179 billion. And not one dime goes into Black banks.
Damn.
Not one dime. The budget of New York City is $80 billion. That's more than most nations, let's be clear.
Yes.
Not one dime goes into Black banks. Black banks lend to Black people more than any other bank. So if you want to change the situation, you want to make sure that Black banks have the necessary capital that they need. That capital is your tax dollars. And we have to find a way of breaking through the old boys network and make sure that your tax dollars goes into Black banks also. Okay.
Mr. Kelly?
Hey, that's a red carpet. I mean, all I got to do is just walk down it, lay it out. I mean, he is accurate and very on point. And the same is true today for federal dollars. Now, there is some work happening on the Hill. Congressman Meeks, who represents New York, has been one of our stalwarts who have been helping to try to look at knocking down those barriers. But the senator is exactly right. And you just count that across all of the aspects or spaces that you touch, whether that's your pension fund money, whether that's, again, to your city money. You have dollars that are not working necessarily in your best interest. And I'll raise my hand. I'm as guilty as anyone else. But the point is of having this conversation is to create a little bit of enlightenment so that we can begin to make better decisions. Because he's exactly right again. The FDIC and the Federal Reserve have proven through secret shopper kind of surveys that African Americans will get more help from an African American bank than they will from a majority bank. And that's in its very simplest form. There are some very complicated responses to that when you actually go through what those secret shopper kind of tests do. But the point we're trying to make is that we have to start doing things in our best interest. And there's another thing I think you may have mentioned in this question. African Americans control 2% of the wealth. That's in 2020. Guess how much of the wealth African Americans control in 1865, 155 years ago?
About the same 2%?
About the same, 2%, less than 2%. It might have been 1.75. So even as this country has grown tremendously in its wealth over the last 155 years, the percentage of wealth for African Americans has remained the same, and by my standards, minuscule, relatively speaking. So that's an effort I think we've got to figure out how to change. It shows up in the net worth of the average family. White to black is a 10x factor, meaning a white family typically has 10 times more on average than an African American family. It shows up even in education, which I talked about a moment ago. You'll see that a high school educated white typically will have more net worth than an educated college graduate black. So, you know, those statistics, right, wrong, and different, what you feel about them, they paint a picture and tell a story. And so we have to be, I think, more diligent about how we can accumulate and move our families forward.
Okay, you said something a minute ago that kind of sparked some curiosity in me. Secret shoppers. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah. So secret shopper is basically the term that you would use. Senator, you're going to appreciate this, and I'm going to let out some family secrets here. So, you know, I grew up in a small town, and we know what it's like being in a small town. It's just, it is what it is when it comes to race. But I learned from my parents to call and get a quote on insurance over the phone, and you would get a different rate than if you went in and walked in and got an insurance quote. So the secret shopper is basically the way of testing, is race a factor in the decision-making process? And what it typically demonstrates is, yes, it is a factor. It's like if I go buy a car from, you know, just say I go buy a car, so I don't put any of the car companies on the spot. And say if I go buy a car, I buy that car and I pay exactly $20,000 for the car. The sticker price is $21,000 on the car. My peer, who doesn't look like me, could go in and buy that same car and may pay $18,500. Get the exact same car with all the same whistles, all the same buttons on it, but there's a difference in price. So secret shoppers typically kind of differentiate what are those factors that may have contributed to the way people are treated differently.
So basically, if I'm understanding this correctly, there are like polls that are done secretly, sending Black people and white people into certain institutions.
Exactly. Well, like surveying. So
yes,
do this all the time. They'll survey and say, you know, how's my product doing? It's the same thing. You just kind of do the reverse of that and maybe go have a shopping experience and see what that shopping experience is like. No different than when you walk in a store. You know, we all have a proclivity to believe sometimes we are under the watchful eye of someone, especially if we walk in an expensive store, and we're there to pick something up versus being there to pay for it. So it is that type of testing when I use that term secret shopper.
Right. So Senator Sanders, can you elaborate on the bill 55653, and just how important it was for you introducing that bill.
Well, I must admit I have an armada of bills that I am coming up with. I suspect that you're speaking about the public banking bill that we're coming
Yes.
up with. Ah, yes. Now, in the state of North Dakota, they have something called a public bank, and that is a repository of public dollars. Now, I pointed out that New York State has a budget, or used to have a budget until this COVID business, of $179 billion. $179 billion. Now, out of that $179 billion, roughly $150 billion is put in the large commercial banks, which often charge us to use the money. Now, wait a minute. We are helping to make them rich and they're charging us. Man, that's somebody who understands capitalism. And it's also us who don't understand it, why we're putting up with this. So imagine if a portion of that $150 billion, let's say a measly $20 billion, were put into a public bank, where we're not simply looking at a fiduciary responsibility, where we're not looking at simply making our owners richer. We are looking out for the good of the state. And one of the goods of the state may be helping Black people own homes. It may be helping Black people own businesses.
Mm-hmm.
It may be paying down on the student debt that is crippling our communities, and still making a profit. That profit may be 1%. That profit may be 0.5%, because it's not designed simply to make a profit in dollars and cents, but it is designed to make a stronger state, a more economically feasible state. And that is what this bill is. And incidentally, since I wrote it, I'm going to tell you, Brother Grant, but I don't want you to tell Brother Kelly. It'd be our secret. In fact, I know that you can keep a secret. I trust you and the whole audience that everybody can keep this secret. And if you believe that one, I got a bridge. I'm from New York. We got bridges. But Brother Grant, I have embedded in the language of this public banking MWBE. I have embedded that we can have some of this $20 billion go through the Black banks. Now, I'm sure that the Independence Bank doesn't need an extra $1 billion or 2 or 3 that we could put up through them. But if they did, then we might be able to lure them to New York, since New York State does not have a single Black-owned bank in it. And we need to change that. So imagine if we got this 20 billion and I wrote the language in such a way that meant that the Black community would always get at least $1 billion a year. You could get yourself out of the hole over time.
Right. Do some powerful things with that.
It really is. And Senator, again, congratulations on what you're doing, because it is, as I talked about earlier, the concentration of wealth is what creates this kind of an exponential curve, not a flat curve. And so we have to understand that, and we have to figure out how we can consolidate and do that in such a way that it's material. So I am also chairman of the National Bankers Association. And so on behalf of my membership, I do want to point out a couple of things. One, we do have an African-American owned bank, I think has some branches there, Industrial Bank now, that took over City National. I think they have a branch or two there. And then there is a African-American, I will say, managed bank in Carver, that the majority of their board is. So I do want to bring a little bit of clarity to that. But yes, we do need more for a city as big as New York. And as rich as New York in our history, it could stand up more banks. And really, we could do that across the country. And it's something that needs to be done. So let me put a point in that. There are only 20 African-American owned and controlled, and I just kind of differentiated the two a moment ago, in this country. There are almost over 5,500 banks in the country, and African Americans control and own only 20. So I want to put that in perspective so that the listening audience kind of really digests that. Now, this is not credit unions and the church credit unions and all of that. We're talking about commercial banks. And so, again, that statistic is about as bad as the net worth one we talked about. And you can probably see there's a little bit of a correlation. But the point is, we have a need for more of those banks that can serve these communities that we care about.
I just really hope that the listener audience really understands and pays attention to this. It's a really powerful and informative discussion about how economics and politics work on a global level, and we need to understand how we can get into the game, into the race, if you will, because all too often we're just not competing. And this discussion here gives us opportunities to learn how to compete on a global stage. And that's one of the reasons we started the HAPI movement and produced the HAPI film, so Black people can learn how to compete on a global stage. Mr. Kelly.
Yes.
You kind of alluded to some of this earlier, but I'm gonna ask the question anyway. How vital are Black banks to our community?
Well, we live in one of the greatest capitalistic countries in the world, in America. It's hands down, it's a great country. The system works. It just has not worked for everyone. And so understanding that in a capitalistic society, as I talked about, the accumulation of money is almost like building muscle, and it's like building muscle memory. And so the more you build it, the stronger it gets. And what you see today is you've got now, I believe, 4 banks that are over $1 trillion in assets in this country. They have accumulated, and they bought other banks, and they bought other banks. And so the point, though, is when you get such a huge muscle, you can be able to do things that are transformative that impact communities. And so what does that mean? You can look at the headlines, and I'm not going to call any of these banks out, but you can see where they make contributions or decide to put $100 million into a certain area, or $50 million into a certain area, or $1 billion of lending into certain areas. They are able to do that because they amassed and accumulated a lot of capital, such that the numbers that they're talking about are really small relative to the base. Even though when we hear the number, it sounds really big and transformative, it's really small on a relative basis. So the point I'm trying to make is, if we're going to build these communities, if you think about it just alone, if everybody's mortgage was with one African-American institution, it's probably one of the strongest banks in the country. But that doesn't exist. And the point I'm making is that we typically have dollars that come into the community and ship out. And again, I'm gonna raise my hand. I am as guilty as anyone else probably under my listening voice. But the point is, if we don't make a conscious decision to change those behaviors, we're gonna continue to get the same outcomes.
So essentially, if I understand this correctly, is that Black banks are vital to the circulation of Black dollars in the community. Is that correct?
Absolutely. They are vital to that because of what the senator said. You're more likely to get a loan to basically open and operate a business. And capital in a capitalistic society, basically business owners create wealth in communities. And so the ability to get capital, you heard him say access to capital is a barrier. The ability to get capital is the opportunity for you to fulfill those dreams, whatever they may be.
All right. In the film, HAPI, you kind of discussed, you gave examples of the time frames in terms of circulation of dollars in the community. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes. So, it's still unfortunate, but, in the Asian community, our understanding is that a dollar will circulate basically 28 days, basically the whole month. So it kind of is self-calculating. In fact, one of the largest minority banks in this country is an Asian bank that is just shy of about $50 billion in assets. And there's a lot to unpack out of that. I won't get into that. In the Hispanic and white communities, you're really looking at around 20 days of circulation. So that means that the dollar that someone earns is spent with a dollar of someone of the same ethnicity, and that goes on for about 20 days. In the African American community, that number is about 6 hours. And so, again, I'll raise my hand. I'm as guilty as others. When you look at your wallet and you look at your checkbook, you think about where do you write checks to? And the list typically runs very thin outside of, church ties and the barbershop and, a few other things. You're now spending money in mostly mainstream America in a way that it doesn't support, a CPA on your block. It may not support a Black architect on your block. It may not support a Black, quote, supermarket or store on your mark. And so those opportunities for that dollar to circulate and maybe go back to that bank to be loaned again in fractional lending, to lend to someone else to start a business, go back and circulate to the bank to go back to be loaned again, is the way the banking system works on fractional lending. And so when those dollars come in, but they go out to the suburbs, and I'll use that as a metaphor, then the opportunity for that multiplier effect just get diminished.
So if you don't spend dollars in your community, you don't have, or not, I'm saying in your community, but with people who live in your community, you're not investing in your community, and as such, there is no production in the community. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly right. Consumption or production. That's exactly right. So it misses the mark there. So the opportunity when you talk about jobs and local jobs, those local jobs come from dollars circulating in that economy. And so if you live in an area, but you spend all of your money outside of that area, you are basically mitigating the opportunity for someone else to have a job in your area, to improve the tax base in your area, to improve the school system in your area. So that's the ill effect of not circulating those dollars in the community.
So buying Black should not just be a cliche. It's something that we almost have to do. Got to actually actively go out seeking Black businesses to support, Black banks to support, because it's basically essential to our life. Everything that kind of involves our community has to deal with Black dollars circulating the community. Is that correct, Senator Sanders?
Well, it's beyond that. It's actually common sense. If you want to, part of the problem that we're finding is people don't feel that these are their communities. And you know what? They're right. We don't own these communities. We don't own the local store. We don't even, by and large, own the home that we live in. So in that sense, this is not our community, that we have been reduced to, at best, a consumer. And I've seen some studies saying that if we continue this path, we will have negative economics within 20 years. Negative wealth. My friends, negative wealth is called a slave. Uh, if you are the wealth of someone else, or every penny that you're making goes to someone else, that is slavery. So we have to, if we're struggling to avoid returning to that type of slavery, or some type perhaps more heinous than that, then we need to control the wealth in our community, and we need to do it yesterday.
Yesterday. So here to call to action. Yesterday, buying Black. Do it yesterday, not today, not tomorrow, yesterday.
Well, in fact, I'll give you an African quote here. The Africans say the best time to plant a tree is yesterday, 20 years ago. The second best time is now. So we have to use the second best time and plant the tree now.
Okay. Y'all hear that? Plant that tree yesterday, or plant it now, not tomorrow. We got to invest now. On that note, Senator Sanders, there's some talk of the integrated areas of investment and how important are and their level of importance. Can you elaborate on them, please?
Well, if you're using it as I understand it, I would say that I'm going to be more intent on what I'm doing in the future. I'm not going to be as integrated in my investment in terms of working with other communities, I'm going to be very intent on building my community. Now, another way of being integrated in investment has to do with the type of investments that you're speaking about, and yes, a good portfolio should include several different areas, so that you can be safe in a downturn, or as we're seeing right now.
So we're looking more specifically for the 8 integrated areas of investment for the community.
Okay.
The housing, the food, like how does those work in conjunction with like a black bank?
Ah. Well, if we have since we have, let me correct myself, Brother Kelly, I stand corrected. Since we have black banks, uh, and we have such wealth, we should use different banks have different strengths, and different banks, some can be commercial banks, some can be based on agriculture, some can be based on many different things. And you may want a relationship with 2 or 3 different banks, depending on what you're trying to build, especially in your community. Um, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, sir.
No, you're definitely on the right track, because one of the things that we were looking at was just understanding the economic plan that is set forth and how to increase economic development. Because if you don't really have a plan and you plan to fail,
Oh,
you know how the saying goes. So when we're
yes.
looking at the economic plan and see how it worked through housing, food, education, those 8 steps, how do those 8 integrated areas of investment tie into a black bank like First Independence Bank?
Well, just to use the First Independence Bank, your example. Now, there are things that we have to do: food, clothing, shelter, education in this society, etc. And under those conditions, there's money that's going to be spent in those areas. Your personal money, of course, your neighborhood's money, of course, but there's also political money that's being spent in these areas. When we speak of bringing a supermarket, and in my community is speaking of bringing in a decent supermarket. Now, the government has funds to subsidize these things, but where are they going to put these funds? These funds could be sent through the Independence Bank. These funds could be used to bring in the different architects and engineers from the community. If we make a point, if we use the power of intention, where we say, okay, by our political muscle is bringing the government to put in 10 million, 15 million, 20 million, but we are insisting that 70% of that goes through the different companies, whether it's independent bank or other banks. Now, if we did that, and that's just one project, imagine if we were that powerful, if we use that power and looked at every part of the equation of food, clothing, shelter, and in education and other areas, and said, we are going to be intentful. We know that this is going to be spent in the course of a year, and we want 70% of these things to go into these areas. Now, in New York City, we elected, it was a black vote that elected Mayor de Blasio. Mayor de Blasio would not have been elected without the black vote. But we have done a poor job of making sure that we organize and say, okay, Mayor de Blasio, um, here are some of the things that we need. We want a playground. We want all of the good stuff. But, and we got some of those things, mind you, but we did poor in saying, and we want 70% of these things to go through this local community, to go through the black architects, the black engineers, the black banks, et cetera, et cetera. And we need to be far more intentful in the days to come, especially with studies saying that we're about to lose 50% of all of our black businesses thanks to
Mhm.
COVID-19 and the pandemic that we're dealing with. we're about to lose 50%. And that means that we don't have a moment to spare where we're going to have to outthink this thing and live in an intentful fashion.
So when we talk about basically this talking to someone like Mayor de Blasio and saying, you know, we got the parks, we got that, but how do we execute that? How's that executed in terms of us being more intentful and saying we want that money to go here? Is that through legislation, or is that just through handshakes and a hug?
Well, it's through it all. The politics is how the sausage is made, and you may not want to see how it's done. You just want to eat it. You just want it done. Now, but that means we all have a role, and the first role is to use that education that Brother Kelly was talking about, to be educated on all of this. An ignorant elector will only create an ignorant elected person. An ignorant electorate can only create an ignorant elected person. So if we become wise to things, we will start choosing people, not because they have a beautiful tie, not because they know how to eat our chicken, not because they know how to smile and giggle and can give you the scripture of the week and all kinds of stuff. But we can go at a higher level, and we can use, in the word of that Janet Jackson, that philosopher, what have you done for me lately? We can have a higher standard and say, we want the bacon brought home. We don't care if it's chicken bacon, turkey bacon, or pork bacon, but you're going to have to bring some bacon in. But first, you have to hold yourself accountable and get to be knowledgeable. I mean, think of it. How many of us have filled out the census? Not enough. How many of us know our elected officials? Very few. How many people know what the elected officials are supposed to do? The difference between a state senator and a federal senator, the difference between a council person and a congressperson. I mean, we don't know. And if you don't know, you cannot hold them accountable because you don't know what they're doing and what they're supposed to do. First, let us hold ourselves accountable. Then let us hold our electeds. If they can't deliver, if a person can't bring home that bacon, then you need to get rid of them. It's an investment. Brother Kelly, if you had an investment of $1 million and it was losing $100,000 a year, how many years would you hold on to that, sir?
You cut
You
it.
see a man like him, it's probably gone in the first year. Man like me, it probably take 20 years, but that's all right. It's not all right, but it's all wrong. So under those conditions, you have to look at all of your elected officials and say, what are they delivering? They either have to deliver good legislation, good community service, good constituent relationship, or they are tackling. Maybe you want them to be a crusader on some social issue, police chokeholds, or something of that nature. But if they're not doing any of these things, then the problem is you. The problem is not them. The problem is you. Why are you holding on to such a terrible portfolio?
Mr. Kelly, investments in the bank. How I can ask this question. When we talk about just community investments, in the sense of first independence, are these investments like supermarkets, apparel stores, things like that? How does they work hand in hand with an institution like yours?
Well, you know, again, it's back to the basics. You want dollars in a community to hopefully spend in that community, to create more jobs in that community, to create better school systems in that community, which creates better housing values in that community, which creates wealth for families, right? And so if you understand everything the senator just said, holding the politicians accountable is part of that process, such that resources for that larger city can be deployed to your area through school money, through roads, through infrastructure, through the ability to even track new business interest in that community, so that again it raises all boats. So you have to spend some time on that. And let me tell you, I understand what it's like to work and make I'll say minimum wage and trying to keep things going and trying to raise a family. It is very, very difficult. And so you don't, quote, have time to deal with those things. But the problem is, if you don't deal with those things, they happen back upon you at somebody else's expense. And so the point we're trying to make here is political engagement creates economic engagement, which really creates culture. And so we have to engage in that manner and be thoughtful about it. Even if you can't do it, ask someone else to help you do it and be accountable and learn, as the senator just made reference, because you may be missing out on your school district growing. You may be missing out on more infrastructure to invest more business or bring business and attract business to your area, which means jobs, which means more taxes, which means raising housing value. So all of those things are interrelated, and we have to spend more time thinking about them because they impact us most of the time indirectly.
So the vitality of entrepreneurship, or just business creation in the Black community, why is that so important?
Well, it's part of creating that ecosystem for dollars to circulate, right? We just talked about what happens in Hispanic, Asian, white, and African American communities. And a lot of times, even in African American communities, the ownership structure may not live in the neighborhood. And you can pick any city, and I could probably tell you the nationality that may be associated with who owns the convenience stores in that neighborhood, who likely owns the dry cleaners in those neighborhoods, who owns the little grocery marts in those neighborhoods. Those dollars siphon out. Who owns the liquor stores in those neighborhoods? So all of those things contribute to really, I'll call it, draining of the economy, in particularly in African American communities. And we have to figure out how to stop some of that leakage and allow it to really be beneficial to the people who live in those communities.
Senator Sanders.
Well, let me just add on to that. Many times you wonder why we don't have Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and baseball teams and this and that. It's often because the local merchants have no affiliation with your community and will not support any of these teams. In fact, they won't even hire you when you come to these stores that you're spending your money in.
Wow. So when it comes to entrepreneurship and business creation in the Black community, it's important. It's so great because really, again, like you just said, if we want something as simple as a little league team, you won't even be able to get that. Right. Are there any other examples you can give, Senator Sanders, to why entrepreneurship and business creation is so important in our community?
Absolutely, because we have children and we need role models that our children can aspire to. If the only role models they see is the drug man or the other nefarious people, then they're going to aspire to those things. If we can't have role models that we can say, look, you can make some money in this community. You can make a lot of money, as a matter of fact, and you don't have to leave as soon as the sun sets. You can live right here amongst us, and you can live in a decent way. And if we don't do that, then we have no role models for our children, and this helps or hurts us with the brain drain, because as soon as our children get to a certain level, we send them to get that good book learning, that good education, and as soon as they get that education, they want to be gone from these communities because we have not had the necessary political infrastructure, the infrastructure of making sure that 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 the local businesses support the church food drive, that the local businesses support the children having musical instruments in their schools. We don't have these things, these businesses, And we are paying for it on many different levels, including not having enough money to support our own politicians. Most of our politicians are getting money from outside of our community, which means that it's very difficult to bite the hand that feeds you.
Mm-hmm.
Damn.
Yep.
Okay. So it all boils down, if I'm hearing this all correctly, and I'm sure the listener audience is probably thinking the same thing, to economic literacy. And one of the things at HAPI, we wanted to make sure that it was economic. We wanted to make sure that people understand that economic empowerment comes through economic literacy, and just how important it is people understanding the basic fundamental tenets of economics, even down to using certain type of vernacular or certain types of words or definitions to describe certain things in economics as well as politics. But with that said, Mr. Kelly, when we think of economic literacy, what programs does First Independence Bank have in fostering economic literacy in the community?
Well, we talk about it more in terms of financial literacy as opposed to just economic, to try to keep it personal and to try to keep it, basic enough that it doesn't intimidate people. In fact, I'll tell you, even the term literacy almost have a negative connotation that you're not literate, right? So the point we're trying to do, though, is think through how can we talk about this in a way that is very comfortable for people and that they can pick up the principles and move forward. So as we talked, even in the film, we talked about, of course, managing your cash and understanding that, but also thinking about life insurance and the need to have that. That's a selfless act you need to put in place if you have a family, so that if something happens to you upon your demise, there is at least some small cushion there for them. And then you move on around the spectrum into things such as stocks and bonds. But the point I'm making is that a lot of this is online, and you can get to access this information. We've got, I believe, over 50 different types of calculators on our bank website, firstindependence.com. So if you're making a decision to buy a car versus lease a car, it will help you make that decision. How much you need to put on a down payment for a house. You know, how long does it take to save to retire? Most people don't know, and I'll give this fact. This is a free one tonight. If you save roughly 18% of your check from the time you turn, let's say 20, 21, 22, you start working. When you get to the age of roughly 60, you can live the same lifestyle without ever having to pick up a stick going forward. But it takes that level of basic principles to apply those and make those work for you. So that's almost like planting the tree, Brother Sanders, but that's a 40-year tree, right? But you get the shade of that tree when you get to 60 that could last you well into your 80s and into your 90s. Now, most of us deal with real life, which says, man, I don't have a silver spoon, and so I got to spend all I have today. And we make the mistake of buying our car before we buy a house. And then you get into that rut of, well, I got a dress. And so you don't start saving until later. Well, the impact of that 5 years or 10 years can be the difference of you retiring at 60 versus now having to work well into your 70s. And so the point I'm making is I'm just demonstrating what we talk about when we talk about financial education, i.e. literacy. Knowing these things, we can make wiser decisions at a younger age and pass that on to our kids in such a way that now it is a family institutional thought pattern, not something we have to stumble upon.
All right, so thank you for that. And I'm going to just clarify something. And you're right, the word literacy, a good friend Felicia always gets on us about that. I like to call it financial wellness. So in the sense of financial wellness, Senator Sanders, are there any programs that we have in the community that you've been a part of that address this, and basically on a basic level? Because I'm finding, even again making this film, that the basics in the black community, we are struggling with basic financial information. And what do we have? Do we have programs in the community that you're a part of that help instill more financial wellness?
Well, there are programs. There's no question that there are programs, but there's also no question there's not enough programs. But let me change this just a hair. I'm looking forward to working with the audience of HAPI to create the programs that we believe that we need. I believe that a person like Brother Grant and Brother Kelly can come together and figure and say, if we had this type of program, we can go a step further. Now, my job is the politics is the art of the possible. My job is to make it happen. Uh, Better minds than mine, Brother Grant and Brother Kelly, quickly come to mind, easily come to mind, um, are the ones who need to come up with these programs, and your audience, for that matter. This is not a spectator sport. That
Right.
you can't get happy just sitting up expecting somebody else to do. No, no, you get happy when you take advantage of your own opportunities and create the society that we want to live in. So I'm looking for the relationship. Now, if you know what I know, audience, you should know me. I'm not going to let Brother Kelly go. Oh, heck no. We're going to do work from now on. Uh, and poor Brother Grant, he's going to think that that he owes me money. I'm going to be around him so much. So it's relational, that we all have to look at this thing as a relationship, and and use everything to create. They can put some ideas together, or y'all can put up some ideas. My job is just to know folk like Brother Kelly and Brother Grant, so I could go to them and say, does this make sense? And if they say, well, yeah, this makes sense, then I can say, well, if it makes sense, this is going to make some dollars.
Right.
Wow.
Relationships.
Taki, let me answer a question. I see someone has asked a question: should you buy a home if you will likely move in 5 to 6 years? I would tell you there's probably a financial calculator that will give you that answer, but my gut reaction is yes, you should, because here's the key to it. One, home ownership actually is expected to increase in value. Doesn't mean it always will, depending on the economy, but the reality is it's going to increase in value. Secondly, even though rates are very, very low, you're still getting a government subsidy in the fact that you can take a tax break against the interest that you're paying on the house that you're buying. And so when you think about it, you may not think 5 or 6 years is a long time, depending on your age, but I would tell you it'll go by very fast. And what that may do for you when you are in the process of moving is allow you to take some equity out that you can roll into that next home. But what is a true fact is if you just pay rent during that period of time, when you move out, you are very hopeful to only get a portion of your deposit back. And if you move too far away, too fast, you may not get that back. So my point is you have a vested interest in owning your own home. The likelihood is in you make money when you buy a home, not when you sell it. So just be sure that you do the best you can to buy it at the right price, and it will hopefully take care of itself such that when you do exit in a 5 or 6 year period, that becomes a positive experience for you. But I will tell you, if I just round numbers, if you're talking about moving inside of a year or a year and a half to 2 years, then that's something that's a little bit different. You have to weigh that because now you got, closing costs and those other kinds of costs associated with it that just may not make sense. But over a 5 year period, that's something that should work for you.
Thank you for that. I just want to say thank you to you two brothers. There are some questions we have in the audience. And if you have some little more time, I would like to ask, could we ask those questions?
I can spare another 10 minutes.
I've got 5. I've got another commitment I got to get to, so I could hang on.
So we'll make it quick. One of the questions is, what percentage of Black banks succeed?
What percentage?
I'm sorry, Black businesses. Black businesses succeed.
I don't know the answer to that.
Well, the percentage of all businesses that are out there, you have a large portion that will fail in the first 5 years. I believe that the figure was 1/3 will fail within the first 5 years. So a black business really has to make sure that it's well established and you've done your math before you get out there.
Okay. Another question we have is, what can we do specifically to create a business?
Repeat your question.
What can we do specifically to create a business? Mr. Kelly?
Well, yes, please.
I really don't know the answer to that, but I would tell you one of the things you ought to think about is who's your customer and what's the product you plan to deliver. If that's a product, that's something that's tangible, or a service that you're planning to deliver. That is the creation of the business. It has to have value to the end user, the customer. And if it doesn't have value to them, I would tell you you don't have a business. But if you can do something that is unique enough or give them an experience that customers are willing to pay for, meaning give you more money than it costs you to produce, then you have a business. That's the best way I can describe it. Now, if you're getting into the technicalities of, should it be an LLC or incorporating those kinds of things, there are small business centers who can help you with that question. But tangibly, I would talk about just products and services immediately.
Thank you for that. And with that, we're going to close it out. I request kindly that you two gentlemen just hang out in the backstage. I just want to close out for the night. Again, you were here listening to another installment of HAPI Talks. How can we make Black dollars circulate in the Black community? How we make Black dollars work for us? We had with us tonight the Honorable Senator James Sanders Jr. and Kenneth Kelly, the CEO and Chairman of First Independence Bank. I thank these two gentlemen for coming tonight and being a part of this discussion, and sharing their vast knowledge and wisdom with us. With that, like I said, you gentlemen, could you please just wait for the backstage, and I'll be right there. Just wanted to talk about what's coming up for HAPI. We have another premiere scheduled for Sunday, August 16th at 5 p.m. Just want to note the time. It's different. As opposed to 7, this one is 5 p.m. Eastern time. Please get your tickets. Tickets available at www.hapifilm.com. Please like, share. If you're not following us, follow on the page. You see the type of information that we have. See the type of people and the caliber of the discussions that we have. Again, follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, hapifilm.com. If you want to go sign up for the newsletter, very informative newsletter. We put it out once a month. You can go to the newsletter section. There's also merchandise on the HAPI Film page. For also those who don't want to wait until August 16th to watch the film is available digitally and on DVD. Just go to hapifilm.com. And trust me, I promise you, you will not be disappointed. With that, I'd like to say special shout out to all those who came into the audience, all the people with the questions. Shout out to the HAPI team, Felicia, Seed, Rock, Tammy, Dion, Elena, all those involved. Special shout out to all those who support the movement. Let's keep it going, let's keep it strong. With that, take care. See you again soon. Peace.